Have you ever found yourself wondering why, as time goes by, older people sometimes seem to grow apart? You hear people say things like, they're just getting old, or it's just how things go after so many years. But the truth is, it's much deeper than that. As we age, we start to see our lives and the relationships around us in a whole new way. What once seemed normal, maybe even acceptable, begins to feel different. Old habits, long-forgotten silences, and unresolved feelings start to surface. And what comes with that can be a mix of emotions, sometimes unexpected ones, like frustration, regret, or even sadness. If you've ever felt a shift in your relationships or wondered why things don't feel the same as they once did, you're not alone. In this video, we're going to explore some of the reasons why these changes happen. They go beyond simple disagreements or daily frustrations. They're about the deep, emotional weight of lived experiences, the things that often go unsaid, the feelings that pile up over time. And if you've ever noticed a growing distance between you and the people you care about, this might help you understand what's really going on. Stay with us till the end, because what you'll learn could open your eyes to something you might not have considered before. Let's get started. Reason 1. The burden of emotional labor. When women reflect on the years they've spent in their marriages, one of the most profound realizations is the amount of emotional labor they have shouldered. It's not something that is often discussed openly, but it's always been there, woven into the fabric of daily life. For decades, many women have been the ones to remember birthdays, schedule appointments, keep the family connected, calm tense moments, and smooth over disagreements. It wasn't just about managing the house. It was the invisible work of making sure everyone's emotional needs were met. At first, this might have felt like a natural part of the role. Perhaps it seemed expected, even necessary. But over time, the weight of it starts to feel heavier. And once the children are grown and the house quiets down, many women begin to notice how one-sided this emotional effort has been. It's not about blame or resentment at first. It's about clarity. Women start to ask, why was I the only one to worry about all of this? Why didn't he step in more? Take someone like Ellen, 72, who spent most of her marriage managing the emotional atmosphere of her home. She kept track of anniversaries, birthdays, doctor's appointments, and even managed the moods of everyone around her. Her husband, Frank, often said, "You just have a gift for that kind of thing." Ellen now sees that it wasn't a compliment. It was a way for him to avoid doing the emotional work himself. And that's something that weighs on her now. Emotional labor often goes unnoticed. It's not something that gets acknowledged with flowers or thank you cards. Yet, it affects the core of a relationship. By the time women reach their later years, that lack of recognition becomes harder to ignore. The emotional exhaustion, silent and long-lasting, begins to catch up. When retirement comes and life slows down, many women no longer feel close to their husbands. They feel tired of carrying the weight on their own. This isn't about pointing fingers, but understanding how emotional imbalance builds over time. When one person bears the emotional burden, it can slowly erode the connection that was once there. And it's only in later years that this imbalance becomes impossible to overlook. Reason 2. The slow breakdown of real communication. It doesn't happen overnight. It's one of those things that sneaks up on you, almost without you even realizing. Over time, the real conversations, the kind where you share your feelings, your worries, and your dreams, begin to fade away. At first, it's subtle. What's left behind are the everyday exchanges. Did you take your medicine? What's for dinner tonight? They're the practical things, the daily logistics of life that need to be managed. But the deeper connections, the ones that make you feel truly seen and heard, begin to slip away. You start to notice it when you find yourself sitting next to your spouse, yet feeling a deep, aching silence between you. It's not that you want constant long talks or grand gestures every evening. It's something simpler, just the feeling that your thoughts and feelings matter to someone who has known you for years. When that connection starts to disappear, the silence becomes heavy. Even though you're sharing the same space, it feels like a quiet loneliness settles in. It's a grief that isn't caused by the loss of a person, but by the loss of connection with someone still physically there. And it's heartbreaking when you realize that the person who used to know how to reach you, or at least tried to, no longer does. This kind of loss doesn't happen quickly. It's gradual, like dust settling in a corner that no one bothers to sweep. It builds up over the years, and suddenly you're left with a relationship that feels distant, even though you've been with that person for decades. Take Joyce, for example. She's 79, and she's been married to Frank for over 50 years. They do everything together, watch the same shows, eat the same meals, and sit in the same chairs. But she can't remember the last time Frank asked her how she was really doing. Not her blood pressure, not her joints, but her. It's not that she expects him to write her love poems or make grand gestures, but she misses feeling like he's still curious about what's going on inside her. For Frank, everything seems fine. They're not fighting, they're not arguing. It's just peaceful. But what he doesn't see is that the silence between them is slowly replacing the warmth that once existed. What Joyce feels is more like living with a roommate than a life partner. So much so that sometimes she talks to the television just to hear her own voice in the room. This isn't about asking for something extravagant. Women, especially as they get older, simply want to feel like they're still valued in the small, everyday moments. They want to be met in the middle with kindness, curiosity, and care. When those things start to disappear, a wedge slowly forms between the couple. Not because of anything that's been said, but because of everything that's been left unsaid. Over time, that wedge can grow into a deep emotional divide. It's a quiet breakdown that's harder to ignore as the years go by. The connection is lost not in a loud, dramatic fight, but in the silence that speaks volumes. If this resonates with you, or if you're still with me, let me know by commenting number 2 below. It helps me know that you're here and engaged. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss any of the content we create. Let's continue and dive deeper into what comes next. Reason 3. Unequal caregiving. As couples age, caregiving often becomes a significant part of their lives. For many, especially in long marriages, one partner, typically the wife, becomes the primary caregiver. At first, this may seem like a natural role, but over time, the weight of this responsibility can cause deep frustration and even resentment. When a partner's health begins to decline, it's not uncommon for the wife to take on the majority of the caregiving duties. She handles everything from medical appointments to managing daily routines. This shift often happens gradually, and the caregiving responsibilities pile up without much acknowledgement. While it might start with small tasks, it can become overwhelming as time passes. The problem arises when the caregiving feels one-sided. The wife may look back on times when she needed support or care, perhaps during her own illness or challenging times, and realize that her husband didn't step up the way she did for him. This lack of balance can create an emotional divide, with the wife feeling burdened and unappreciated. Take, for example, someone like Ruth, who has spent years caring for her husband, Larry, who suffers from chronic health issues. Ruth lovingly took on the role of caregiver without much hesitation, but as she grew older, she began to realize that when it was her turn to be sick, Larry was distant and disengaged. His lack of involvement during her own health struggles created a sense of emotional isolation for her. Over time, the constant imbalance in caregiving became a source of quiet resentment. This doesn't mean the husband is intentionally neglectful, but often, it's the failure to recognize the emotional labor involved in caregiving that wears on the wife. It can feel like the love and partnership once shared has turned into a caretaking duty. When this feeling lingers, it begins to strain the connection between them, making the wife feel more like a caregiver than a partner. Reason 4. Lack of appreciation. One of the most painful issues that arise in long-term marriages is the feeling of being unappreciated. Over time, many women feel like their contributions, whether it's managing the household, taking care of the children, or supporting their husbands, go unnoticed. They may have spent years ensuring that everything runs smoothly, but when the acknowledgement doesn't come, it can be deeply hurtful. This feeling of being unappreciated doesn't necessarily arise from a lack of effort from their spouse, but from the way their work is often overlooked or taken for granted. For many women, they don't expect grand gestures or constant praise, but it can be disheartening when even the smallest efforts seem to go unnoticed. Something as simple as a thank you or recognition for their hard work can make all the difference. However, over the years, this becomes rare. The emotional labor that women put into their relationships, the countless hours spent caring, organizing, and managing, is often seen as their responsibility, not something that should be valued or celebrated. Consider someone like Linda, who's been married for 45 years. Over the decades, she has always been the one to manage the household, scheduling doctor appointments, organizing family events, and taking care of her husband, Jack. But lately, she's noticed that Jack no longer says thank you or even acknowledges the things she does. She's begun to feel like she's simply expected to do everything, without any recognition. This feeling has slowly eroded the love she once felt for Jack. It's not that he's actively cruel, but it's the constant assumption that she'll handle everything that has left her emotionally exhausted. When a partner doesn't feel seen or appreciated for the things they do, it creates a quiet resentment that builds over time. It's not necessarily about a lack of love, but about a lack of acknowledgement. The smallest recognition can make a world of difference, and when that disappears, the bond between partners begins to weaken. Reason 5. Loss of independence and identity. For many women, their roles as wives and mothers have often come at the cost of their own identity. In the earlier years of marriage, it's common for women to put their personal ambitions and desires on hold, choosing instead to prioritize family, caregiving, and supporting their husbands. But as the years pass, this sacrifice can begin to feel more like a loss of self, especially if the partner has not been supportive or encouraging of them pursuing their own goals. The sense of having lost their own identity or forgotten their dreams can breed feelings of bitterness and regret. Women might look back at their lives and realize that they spent years of their lives trying to be everything for everyone else, and in doing so, they've forgotten what makes them feel alive and fulfilled. These feelings can be especially painful if their partner has never really taken an active interest in helping them chase their own dreams or in supporting their personal growth. Take Mary, for example. She spent decades taking care of her children and supporting her husband, Bob. While she was always putting her family's needs first, she put her own dreams, whether it was starting her own business, going back to school, or pursuing her hobbies, on the back burner. Now that her children are grown and she's in her late 60s, she finds herself feeling unfulfilled. She wonders if she's lost the chance to pursue her own happiness because she was so focused on making sure everyone else was happy. Meanwhile, Bob never really encouraged her to go after her passions. He assumed that her happiness was tied to her role as his wife, and he never thought to ask her what she wanted out of life beyond their marriage. For women like Mary, this loss of independence is not just about career opportunities. It's about the gradual loss of a sense of self. Over time, they can begin to feel like they are defined solely by their role as a wife and mother, and the bitterness comes from the realization that their personal needs and desires were sidelined in favor of fulfilling others. When this loss of identity isn't acknowledged, it can drive a wedge between partners. The emotional distance that results from this loss can feel like abandonment, as if their partner is no longer interested in who they are as an individual. Reason 6. Different approaches to aging and growth. As women age, many begin to seek personal growth, new hobbies, or deeper emotional connections. This period of growth and exploration is often tied to the sense that their lives are changing, and they want to make the most of their later years. They may begin to take up new hobbies, attend workshops, or become more focused on personal fulfillment and growth. However, if their husbands remain passive or disengaged, this emotional withdrawal can create a gap that feels insurmountable. This disconnect can feel like abandonment, especially when one partner is still striving for personal growth while the other is content to remain in the same routine. Over time, this gap can create a sense of isolation, even when they are living in the same home. It's not necessarily that the husband no longer cares, but rather that he has become complacent, leaving his wife to feel like she's evolving alone. For example, consider Sarah, who is in her 70s. She's always been interested in yoga and meditation, and now, more than ever, she's eager to explore these passions. She joins classes, reads spiritual books, and immerses herself in activities that make her feel centered and fulfilled. But her husband, Tom, has become increasingly disengaged. He spends most of his time watching TV and doesn't show any interest in exploring new activities. While Sarah is seeking deeper emotional connections, Tom is content with the status quo. This growing emotional divide between them leaves Sarah feeling lonely, even though they are still together. The lack of emotional connection is painful because it feels like a silent rejection. While Sarah is growing and evolving, Tom is stagnating, and this contrast feels isolating. Women often feel the need for emotional connection in their later years, and when their husbands disengage from that, it can create a sense of abandonment. It's not about wanting grand gestures or dramatic changes, but about the desire to feel emotionally supported and engaged. When that emotional withdrawal happens, it can leave a partner feeling as though they are evolving alone, which can be heartbreaking. The challenges that many women face in long-term marriages often come down to a deep emotional weariness. Over the years, the imbalance in emotional labor, the lack of appreciation, and the fading of real communication can create a growing divide. It's not about hatred or animosity, but about the quiet sadness that comes from years of giving without receiving the same level of care, understanding, or acknowledgement. When women begin to feel unappreciated, disconnected, or even invisible in their marriages, it often leads to feelings of resentment. Not because of what's actively happening, but because of what's missing. The emotional neglect, the lack of recognition, and the loss of identity can leave a woman feeling like she's been carrying the weight of the relationship alone. And when this burden goes unacknowledged for too long, it becomes hard to ignore. The key here is understanding that these feelings of grief and loss don't stem from a place of bitterness, but from a deep emotional fatigue. It's a quiet longing for the connection and appreciation that once existed. Relationships require effort from both partners to maintain that emotional bond, especially as they grow older. If one partner has been emotionally distant or disengaged for a long time, the other may begin to feel abandoned, even though the person is physically present. Ultimately, these challenges are a natural part of the aging process and long-term relationships, but they don't have to define the future. Acknowledging the emotional gaps and addressing them through open communication can go a long way in healing and reconnecting. It's about recognizing the emotional labor one person has been carrying, offering the support that's been missing, and taking the time to rediscover each other. If these points resonate with you, take a moment to reflect on your relationship. It's never too late to initiate change and rebuild the emotional foundation. The effort is worth it, as it can bring back the warmth, understanding, and connection that may have been lost over time.